All right, so welcome to our expanded um, week 6 class. This is just with a little bit of an extra demonstration to help refine and pinpoint, focus all the ideas that we covered and narrow them towards an actual assignment that you guys could do this week. I put this up on our blog. This is just a bit of a template for you to use in terms of breaking down the work you do this week. We looked at this image for our last practical demonstration, and I put the steps. These are all the steps that we've now been covering, from gesture to skeleton to construction to muscle and light and shadow. And the goal of the class is for you to see all those things together. These are the steps in terms of what I'd like for you to be thinking about. So you can see that there's areas in here that are more maybe character specific. If you don't have an interest in that, learning about anatomy as something that can facilitate the projection of story through body type, then just leave it out. Or you can just do figure studies. It doesn't have to be of anything character specific. So that's what you'll find here. But these, I'm going to go through and do one more demonstration for you so you can point out how some of these things might impact the designs that you're looking at if you are trying to see character-driven information. So before I go any further, spoiler alerts, spoiler alerts. We're going to look at, since it was part of our discussion in class, Abby from Last of Us 2. And so, unfortunately, if you haven't played it and you want to play this and not get a spoiler, then you have to stop watching the video immediately. Okay, so 3, 2, all right. So what I pulled out was, I mean, as far as The Last of Us goes, the recent one, Abby's character is the most developed and nuanced for the ways that she changes throughout the story. So there's three definitive acts for her. There's a youthful act. There's this kind of vengeful persona that she develops, and I'll leave out the reasons why. That's my they nod to the spoiler. And then there's this kind of emaciated version of her who is kind of made a lot of changes in her life, and at the end of the story, she's now like kind of a shell of this kind of hyper masculine heroine, at least in her body type, right? So let's do the same steps that we talked about here. What I'm looking to do is just apply them to this so that you can have a sense of what it is that you might want to be looking for in homework. And just to maybe save us some time, I did the gesture. So like this would be your step one in the homework. Find a character, or it could just be a figure. It doesn't have to be anything story driven. The reason I'm picking this is because I want to be able to connect to the things that we talk about in class to people that have an interest in continuing with moving the figure drawing information toward an end, toward character design. So, what is the unique qualities that her gesture, weight, pose bring to this character? The first is this is a very rigid, powerful pose, right? If anything, everything that we see here as a shape is stable. And so that is now immediately kind of transferred into the way that we would understand her. We could look at it relative to archetypes. This is, in many, we could see this as a heroine, that it's like, the feminine character, except it's really a blend, right? It's not the princess type that you would get in that initial Disney archetype lineup. It's not the hero, right? The heroic version of just the heroine might be like a Laura Croft, right? That's the hero, kind of the focused heroine in terms of the powerful heroine. But Laura Croft is overly sexualized, right? She has large breasts and wide hips and a really narrow waist, pouty lips, right? So Abby is kind of like the more of moving this into that area, and that's why there's actually interesting discussions online. If well, I guess I don't know if they're interesting or not, but I've seen discussions online as to whether or not she's supposed to be like a trans character, and I don't think that's the case, but it's an interesting read despite. I mean, interesting if it were true. and unique. So here we have a maybe these two mixed, right? That's really what's happening here is these two are plus together. So now that archetype gives me, there's even like so this is now going to get even weirder because now I'm going to start doing spoilers. But there is a sex scene with her, and she has a very masculine build, which is all of the available information in terms of what's exposed looks very much like a male typed body, which is probably very realistic for her story. A soldier, post-apocalyptic times, one of the better soldiers, all of this. So these would be two things that we're immediately connecting to with gesture. Stable, powerful stance, center of gravity. And then in terms of using that kind of Riley gesture to also be able to look at shape and silhouette early on, she is moving towards that very powerful um, quality of a heroine, but with many kind of masculine body type or many masculine shoulder, hip, boxier chest, right? In terms of the what we're used to seeing maybe in character development for these types of story. That is true of the face too, and we'll get there in a second. But first, I wanted to compare gesture. So, how do we understand this gesture, which I would say is kind of just emblematic of her state in the middle of the story, versus her youthful gesture? So, when drawing this one, it feels different. Like the character quality is different. This one I would say is more carefree. And why is it more carefree? It doesn't hold that same rigid center of balance, like that kind of immobile posture. Here, there's a lot of movement and play, and there's a lot of asymmetry in her hips and shoulder line and head tilts, right? There's just a lot more of a relaxed attitude in this pose, right? And that says all of the things that we need to know about her, right? In her body language. By the time we get to the end of the story, we're seeing a very different kind of manifestation of this character's physicality. So we'll do this one together, but just to take maybe that one on the right, head, gesture, Riley, shoulder, looking for the width of the shoulder to the center of the pubic bone. So now we have a very different posture. The evolution from here to here was one of rigidity. This is a looser posture and position. This is very rigid, and now it's like that has all been sucked out of her stance, right? So we have a bent or kind of a warped or um, crouched body posture, which denotes a bit of weakness or exhaustion, right? So we have something like this, and then we have what looks like a very kind of weak stance in terms of supporting weight. So kind of just playing with all these longer rhythms that we've talked about in terms of the gesture. Here's the weight bearing leg. And then if we're thinking about, those dynamics of center of gravity, I would make this the opposite of this one. Right? I would say wherever that center of gravity is, I'm not going to put that supporting leg anywhere near it. Like even if this leg comes out, so let's say it goes this way, I would put it back here. Or that's kind of how I see this, the rest of the legs working in this one, right? So that it's only barely holding her up, or her weight is just tenuously held. And then this arm is kind of back. Her shoulders are rolled forward, right? So look at that difference in posture. The shoulders kind of roll forward. Here they're rolled back, right? Which is like kind of a badass posture. It pushes the chest out and makes the back feel taller. Here the shoulders are rolled forward. There's this slouch to her posture. And then this arm is just kind of down. Right? So in total, it's a very weak posture. And in terms of archetype, if we continue to push or kind of relate these, it even starts to go towards like the kind of the weight push towards the bottom, or that kind of sidekick archetype, that gravity being held lower, right? That she feels like her center of gravity has shifted like down here, whereas it's all top heavy. So that would be a way to start to see the initial stage in our gesture drawing is something that is, or our figure workflow, something that isn't set in doing this one thing. That these are all different vehicles for you to figure out and try to identify ways to tell the story that you want. If we look at heads, it's the same thing. We could go back to our head notes from last week and say, well, how do I get from 1 to 2 to 3? And I bet you could do, all of you could do this. This is the youthful version, number 1. There's more malar fat. I see less structure, and the shape of the overall head is slightly more rounded. Right, so this is her looking probably the most feminine in the story that she does as a younger woman. And then as she evolves in terms of becoming a bit more masculine in build, which just means she's presented as being shirtless, right? Like this, that she has arms bigger than most of the male characters. She's kind of thought of in higher esteem than a lot of the other male soldiers, right? That she takes on a much squarer outlook. Here in it, we see that in the mandible, the broad chin, right? So this comparison, I think there's more of an angularity to her cheek. So this feels a little bit wider, right? Oops. And then the third one, a lot of that information is kind of now, it's almost like this one repeated. So we've come full circle in a sense, but with interior information that differs. So we kind of have the beginning and end of her journey, at least in shape, mirrored, but then the inside is a different skeletal or skull structure because of subcutaneous fat being removed for her, like starvation, without giving too many spoilers already. We could say starvation. So here I'm seeing like pockets, right? This is like recessed areas because of less fat. There's a sharper core shadow to her jaw there, where the rest are these two. This one's the roundest. This is a little bit rounder. This is square. So we're seeing that fat starting to go missing, right? And I'm leaving out like the skin and that it's damaged and the hair, right? Just looking at structure. But that's an evolution, right? It's told to us through shape. It's told to us through position. It's told to us through skeleton. So those are all things or ways that I'm considering step 1, right, in the handout that I've given you. So step 2, what I'm thinking is that you start to take a bit more of a revisit to or you try to revisit in your workup of the drawing the discussions that we've had about landmark, because it's been a little while since we've now been working on skulls and faces for a bit, and it would be a nice advantage, especially building now up to an anatomy, to just plot those areas. And so we'll just do this one together. The other ones are there just as a way to show you kind of what I find to be interesting about using body type to communicate a narrative. She's not, the most expressive character. She's pretty stoic. So, I mean, she's not making long soliloquies. I mean, she has moments of drama in the game or the story, but as a visual person or artist, I'm mostly interested in how the story is communicated to me in visual terms. So for the next step on my gesture, I'd be making my rib cage, my sternum, my thoracic arch. Here's the opening, my clavicle. And so she's got pretty broad, straight shoulders. So I'll put that. I'm not going to give her the normal, or the generic female design, which would be to make this very horizontal, the clavicle. Instead, I'm going to lift it. I've also given her somewhere in between male and female for a rib cage. Right? So it's not at the 90 that men would have, but it's also not at the 60. This is the area of the coastal cartilage. Here's through the landmark of the front, belly button, pelvis. Can't see these. So if you choose characters with a lot of clothing, this is going to be the challenging part of your homework this week, is making sure that you're able to read still, where all of your landmarks are, that you can still, even without, if you don't have a lot of experience with anatomy, that you can still get an idea of where those shapes are and what they look like and what they're doing. So this one would probably even have a little bit too much more clothing than I would normally choose for this assignment, but because I wanted to have something that's also story focused, I chose this one. The Hulk was probably better because he has, all of the abs and the core that we studied in terms of our muscles is very clear for him. But whatever you can find, maybe mix it up so that you're not constantly trying to, make your life hard. And then for the arms, since we're not going to put muscles here this time, let's leave them as, just our cylinders. So I have a clear planar development for the rib cage. There's a front and there's a side. My pelvis has a front and a side as a box. So it's interesting here to see her with a hammer. I think it's a tool that matches her psychology well. I think in this stage of the storytelling, she's very much, you hear that expression, like if to a hammer everything looks like a nail. She kind of represents that. Like the solution to everything is like revenge or killing scars or whatever it is. And then the kind of the loss of that black and white attitude is what starts her transition into her final character transformation, at least in a way. And by the way, I don't know anything about video games, just so you know, or storytelling. This is not, and I also don't work in video games, so this is not like I know all this stuff. I'm just making it up, right? Sometimes I might sound like I know what I'm talking about, but I genuinely don't. So here's the arms, legs. You put some, if it helps, you could put some of those notes for landmark shapes, doorknob, femur. You can make a little cylinder here for the bottom of the leg. But mostly the legs, the neck, the head, I would try to see as masses so that if you do choose to go into that last step, which was trying to get a sense of lighting, like, so why consider just the anatomy and the form without looking at ultimately how they've been lit? That's something that you should also do, and this is an easy way to think about how to light these basic shapes without going into detail. So this would be fine as step 2, right? I don't want anything more or less than what's right here. Step 3, right? So I'm going to keep these all layered in case you do want to see them as different stages. Let's take some of this away, an opacity, and now let's just put on our muscle. So I'm going to have to make this up, unfortunately, because I don't see the muscle in this breakdown or character view. So what we're going to look for first is using our notes, just what we know to be happening. So more challenging. Now, in each one, as we go through these, your muscles can also tell story. So abs, if we just going to go back to our archetype here, we said the abs in women were different. They tend toward a different shape. In men, they are more of a bullet. In women, they are more of a face, right, because of the rib cage. So maybe we try to give something in between that for her, in the way that we aim to maintain her basic idea of in silhouette and in gesture, with the muscles just kind of being micro arguments, right, that build back up to that whole. So that would be our first idea. Now, once we have the idea of placement, the next question is, well, where does it go? Here. So remember, the abs go down, the fifth rib goes up. So they always sit right below this. And if you can find this point, which was the rhythm of the right off the pit of the neck down to the 10th rib, that's the coastal plane. So in here is where the abdomen is going to start. So it starts there. That's where you're going to fit the top of the bullet. The bottom rounded part of the bullet sits here. And in this slightly contrapposto pose, this side is going to be stretching. So I'm going to make this an S curve. It's here. As soon as it hits my perspective, it has to go with it. Then tucks back. This side is going to be a C curve. So kind of pinching, hits, and then in. So that would be first step in muscle is the part. We also, in doing so, were able to communicate the second step, which was placement or position, which is where does the muscle begin and end? The insertion and the origin. If you know the insertion and the origin, you very easily know the gesture of the muscle. And that's why we made it S on this side, right? And then more of a C on this side, more of a pinch on that side. This is the center line. That's just a guideline for me to design the inside now. So belly button on Abby is going to be vertical, but maybe it could be a mixture, right? Because if she does have a lot of weight in her upper arm and shoulder, it could change this. I know we've talked a lot about belly buttons in men and women. And then lastly, we could decide what kind of internal structure we want to give her. Like for the Hulk, we made it, or I tried to make it really clear that it's irregular and asymmetrical. And maybe she would be something similar. So I could do my kind of fanning of pattern and shape up. And then on this side, maybe I'm just going to drop it so that it feels irregular enough, that it's not perfect. She's not an idealized character. So that would be good. And then the last thing we would do just to kind of point towards the next step is just planes in value. So the first two planes always come out, the next two go back. So they're getting halftone. The next two come out, the last two go back. Okay, so then that would mean that for these, I'm going to be seeing on this one just a little bit of, if she had a different type of clothing that showed off her abs, we would probably see like a little bit of catch light or highlight here. And that's it, right? So that would be working on step 3, which is really fine to stop, but you don't have to go back into the whole lighting if it's not something that you think is going to help you with the anatomy. I just always want you seeing the big picture of our process, why it's important for us to structure things in a linear way. Let's do the oblique. And that's going to be our last muscle, but let's do it a different color just so it won't interfere. I think in our lecture we used orange. Okay, and that's going to start right here, front, side, and back. So I'm going to drop that down. Remember the oblique angle was up here and then down at the pelvis for the attachment. So I want to show that this muscles first and foremost have to be parts, positioned, so that they show gesture. The last is perspective. The perspective of the ab was in the way it wrapped to the chest and then to the pelvis. Perspective of the oblique will start at the same. Can it be a wrapping line? And if it's not a wrapping line, can I overlap it? Maybe I can overlap it right here to show it's going behind. And I would probably leave this a little bit thinner, even if it is for her with a lot of build, because this is where men would store subcutaneous fat. Right? So I wouldn't give her like a belly like the Hulk had. In an average male, I probably would. This side is stretching, so that's going to get an S curve, and then it's going to touch back and down. So let's fill these in. So that would be my oblique there. That's the part, position, perspective, and then at the very end we could give it a bit of detail. Right? So the detail we were thinking about were these threads or the striations of the muscle starting under each rib, being and giving a sharper, kind of harder design to the top of the muscle as it's kind of sheer or more sheer to the rib cage. And as we move towards the bottom, that gets a little bit softer, especially here because it looks like it's pinching. So we get more of that rounded C curve or ball. This is where the muscle turns, so that could be a good perspective that we show that this is a front. this is exaggeration, but try showing a little bit of a front here so that we get side, front. This is a side because remember highlights equal corners. So put that highlight there, thinking of that as a plane change, and then front. And then the only other thing I'd want for you to find in this is if you can get your as is, look for a triangle right on the inside and up against the abdomen. This is really going to help you placing or place the muscles to be more accurate because all muscles have these fossas around them. So we don't want the muscles just to kind of end up overtaking the majority of the figure and kind of seeping into these areas that should be read as pockets or negative space. So that would be it, right? This would be kind of all the way through that homework example and trying to give consideration to the merit, right, of each one of these steps as it might end up applying to stuff that you'll hopefully be doing or thinking about in the future if you take this more of the kind of the industry directed way. The very last stage there that's recommended is to light, and that would be an optional one, right? To light is to just give a bit more of that three value scale on top of what we have. And if you can do that if you feel like you would like the challenge, but otherwise, I think this would be good enough, right? There's a lot to be worked on just here as it is. So hopefully this is helpful. If you have any questions, just let me know.